I never thought a delivery driver's nightmare would start with a woman named Brenda holding a clipboard and blocking my driveway at 6 in the morning. But that's exactly how my Tuesday began in the peaceful suburb of Meadowbrook, Arizona. My name is Nichols, and I run a small propane delivery business serving the residential areas around Phoenix. It's honest work, early mornings, heavy lifting, and dealing with the occasional difficult customer. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened when Brenda Mitchell became the president of the Sagebrush Estates Homeowners Association. The trouble started 3 weeks ago when I pulled my delivery truck into Sagebrush Estates at dawn. I'd been servicing this neighborhood for 5 years without a single complaint. My route was simple. Enter through the main gate, wind through the streets, refill tanks for my regular customers, and leave through the back service entrance. The whole thing took maybe 2 hours, and I was always gone before most people left for work. That morning, Brenda stood at the intersection of Cactus Lane and Desert View Drive, her perfectly manicured hand raised like a traffic cop. She wore a crisp white blouse despite the heat, her blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. I rolled down my window. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone friendly. "You certainly can," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm Brenda Mitchell, the new HOA president, and I need to see your commercial vehicle permit for operating in this neighborhood." I blinked. "Commercial vehicle permit? Madam, I've been delivering propane here for 5 years. Nobody's ever mentioned a permit." Her smile never wavered, but her eyes went cold. "Well, things are different now. I've implemented new rules to maintain our property values and neighborhood aesthetic. Commercial vehicles are no longer permitted to use residential streets during morning hours. You'll need to apply for a special permit, which takes approximately 6 to 8 weeks to process." 6 to 8 weeks. My stomach dropped. I have 12 customers on my route today who are expecting deliveries. Some of them are running on empty. "That's not my problem," Brenda said, crossing her arms. "Rules are rules. You can park at the main entrance and cart your equipment in if you'd like, but this truck is not coming through." I looked down the street. My first customer, old Mrs. Henderson, lived half a mile into the development. My propane tanks weighed over 100 pounds each. There was no way I could physically haul them that distance. "This is insane," I said. "Can I at least see this rule in writing?" Brenda pulled out her phone and showed me an email she'd sent to the HOA board the previous night at 11 p.m. The board consisted of her and 2 other people, both of whom I later learned were her close friends. They'd approved the new commercial vehicle restriction via email at midnight. The whole thing reeked of a setup. "I need to make these deliveries," I said firmly. "People depend on propane for cooking and heating. It's a necessity." "Then they should have planned better," Brenda replied. "Or perhaps you should follow proper procedures. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll call the police for trespassing." I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to just drive past her. What was she going to do, throw herself in front of my truck? But I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I put the truck in reverse and backed out of the neighborhood. My phone started ringing immediately. Mrs. Henderson called first, asking where I was. Then came Mr. Patterson, the Johnsons, the Reeves family. I explained the situation to each of them, and they were all furious, but what could they do? Brenda had the HOA bylaws on her side, even if she'd just made them up 12 hours ago. I spent the rest of the day researching. The HOA did technically have the right to regulate commercial vehicle access, but the way Brenda had implemented it was shady at best. She'd given no notice to residents, no grace period for existing service contracts, and no alternative solutions. She just decided one night to flex her new power, and I was the unlucky target. That evening, I drafted a formal application for the commercial vehicle permit. I included my business license, insurance documents, a list of customers I serviced in the neighborhood, and references from satisfied customers. I submitted it through the HOA's online portal and waited. 2 days later, I got a response. Application denied. Reason: failure to meet aesthetic standards for commercial vehicles in residential areas. I called the HOA office. Brenda answered. What aesthetic standards? I demanded. My truck is clean, properly maintained, and clearly marked. What's the actual problem here? The problem, Brenda said slowly, is that your truck is an eyesore. It's large, it's industrial looking, and it doesn't fit the character of our neighborhood. We're trying to maintain a certain standard here. It's a propane delivery truck. It looks like every other propane delivery truck in Arizona. Exactly, and we don't want commercial vehicles in our neighborhood. I've made that very clear. But your own rules say I can apply for a permit. And you did, and it was denied. Feel free to reapply in 6 months. She hung up. I sat in my office, staring at the wall. 12 regular customers in Sagebrush Estates, all of whom had prepaid for monthly service. Some of them were elderly, disabled, or otherwise unable to easily arrange alternative delivery methods. And Brenda was playing games because she could. Then I remembered something. Brenda herself was one of my customers. I pulled up my client list and there it was. Brenda Mitchell, 847 Desert View Drive, Sagebrush Estates, monthly propane delivery for her outdoor kitchen and pool heater. Her last fill-up had been 3 weeks ago, right before she became HOA president. A terrible, wonderful idea started forming in my mind. I called Mrs. Henderson first. She was 82 years old and had lived in Sagebrush Estates since it was built. Mrs. Henderson, it's Aaron from Desert Sun Propane. I need to ask you something about the HOA. That awful Brenda woman, Mrs. Henderson said immediately. I voted against her, you know, but she ran unopposed because nobody else wanted the headache. Can residents request a vote to overturn HOA decisions? Well, yes, according to the bylaws. You need 20% of homeowners to sign a petition, and then the board has to hold a special meeting. But Brenda controls the board, dear. Her and those 2 friends of hers will just vote down anything they don't like. What if we got enough signatures to call for a full neighborhood vote? Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a moment. That would take 50% of homeowners. There are 240 homes in Sagebrush Estates. You'd need 120 signatures. Could it be done? Maybe. People are already upset about the new parking restrictions and the paint color approvals she's requiring. But organizing that many people, that's a big task. I'll do the work, I said. I just need to know it's possible. It's possible, Mrs. Henderson confirmed, and I'll be your first signature. Over the next week, I went door to door every evening after finishing my other routes. I explained the situation to every homeowner I could find. Most were sympathetic, especially my existing customers who were now having to drive to a refill station 20 minutes away. But many were also afraid of crossing Brenda. She fined the Martinses $200 because their garbage cans were visible from the street, one woman told me. I can't afford to get on her bad side. She made us repaint our house, another man said. Said the beige we chose wasn't on the approved color list, cost us $3,000. $3,000 for paint that looks exactly like what we had before. The stories kept coming. Brenda had been HOA president for less than a month, and she'd already made herself the neighborhood dictator. She walked around with her clipboard, documenting violations, sending out fines, and generally making everyone miserable. But fear only goes so far. By the end of the week, I had 70 signatures. By the end of the second week, I had 105. I needed 15 more. That's when Brenda caught wind of what I was doing. I was standing on the front porch of a house on Mesquite Road when I saw her marching up the sidewalk. The homeowner, a nervous-looking guy named Tom, immediately retreated inside and closed the door. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Brenda demanded. "Exercising my right to petition the HOA board," I said calmly. "It's in your bylaws. You're not a resident. You have no rights here." Actually, residents are allowed to bring concerns to the board on behalf of service providers who are being unfairly impacted by HOA decisions. It's in Section 12 of your governing documents. I checked. Her face went red. "You're trespassing." "I'm on a public sidewalk and I've been invited onto private property by homeowners. I'm not breaking any laws." "We'll see about that." She pulled out her phone and dialed. "Yes, police. I need to report someone soliciting without a permit in my neighborhood." I waited while she made her complaint. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Rodriguez stepped out looking tired and annoyed. "What's the problem here?" he asked. Brenda launched into a dramatic explanation about how I was harassing residents and trespassing and operating a petition without proper authorization. I stood quietly and let her talk herself out. When she finally finished, Officer Rodriguez turned to me. "Sir, do you have a solicitor's permit?" "I'm not selling anything," I said. "I'm collecting signatures for an HOA petition. That's not commercial solicitation." "He's disrupting our neighborhood," Brenda insisted. "Madam, if residents are voluntarily signing his petition, he's not doing anything illegal." Officer Rodriguez looked at me. "But maybe it's time to call it a day just to keep the peace." "Of course," I said. I had 105 signatures in my folder. I could get the last 15 some other way. Brenda looked furious, but she couldn't argue with the cop. We both left. That night I got creative. I set up a simple website explaining the situation and asking residents to fill out a digital form if they wanted to sign the petition. I posted the link on the neighborhood Facebook group, which Brenda didn't control because she wasn't tech-savvy enough to figure out how to take it over. By morning, I had 130 signatures. I submitted the petition to the HOA board through their official channels, requesting a special meeting to vote on overturning the commercial vehicle restrictions. According to the bylaws, they had to schedule the meeting within 30 days. Brenda scheduled it for the maximum 30 days out, clearly hoping people would lose interest or that she could find some way to block it. She also sent out an email to all residents explaining that my petition was misguided and would lower property values and compromise neighborhood security. But she made one critical mistake. She didn't schedule her own propane delivery. I'd been watching her account. Brenda used a lot of propane. Between her outdoor kitchen, where she hosted her book club meetings, her pool heater that ran constantly, and her backup generator system, she went through her tank faster than most customers. Based on her usage history, she was due for a refill right around the time of the HOA meeting. And I simply didn't schedule it. This is where I need to be clear about what I did and didn't do. I didn't sabotage anything. I didn't touch her equipment. I didn't do anything illegal. I simply stopped providing her with service. And because she'd blocked my access to the neighborhood, I had a perfectly legitimate business reason to discontinue her account. I couldn't service what I couldn't reach. I sent her a formal letter explaining that, due to the HOA's commercial vehicle restrictions, I was unable to access her property for propane delivery and was therefore terminating her service contract. I recommended she contact an alternative provider. The letter was professional, polite, and completely justified. 2 weeks went by, then 3. The HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening. On Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Brenda. "I need a propane delivery immediately," she said. "No hello, no pleasantries." "I'm sorry, but I discontinued your service," I said. "As I explained in my letter, I never got any letter. It was sent certified mail to your address. You should have received it 2 weeks ago." "Well, I need propane. I'm hosting an event on Thursday." "I'd be happy to help, but I can't access the neighborhood with my truck. HOA rules, you know." There was a long silence. "How much propane do I have left?" I pulled up her account. Based on her typical usage, she probably had a day's worth, maybe less. "I don't have access to your tank readings, madam. You'd have to check your gauge. This is ridiculous. You're doing this on purpose." "I'm running a business. I can't service customers I can't reach. I'm sure you understand." She hung up on me. I felt a small twinge of guilt, but I pushed it aside. Brenda had created this situation. She'd used her HOA power to punish me and inconvenience my other customers. Now she was experiencing the consequences of her own rules. Thursday came. I showed up at the HOA meeting an hour early, carrying a box of printed documents. The meeting was held in the community center, a nice building near the neighborhood entrance. Residents were already filing in, more than I'd expected. Word had spread. Brenda arrived 15 minutes before the meeting start time. She looked frazzled, her hair not quite as perfect as usual, her makeup a little smudged. She saw me and her expression turned thunderous. "You," she hissed. "Good evening, Brenda. My propane is completely empty. I had to cancel my book club meeting. My pool heater is off. My backup generator won't work." "That's unfortunate. Have you tried calling another provider?" I called 6 companies. "They're all booked out for days. And do you know what they told me? They told me they can't come into this neighborhood either because of HOA restrictions." I hadn't thought of that, but it made sense. The commercial vehicle ban affected all service providers, not just me. Sounds like those restrictions are pretty inconvenient. "You're enjoying this." "I'm here for the HOA meeting. That's all." She looked like she wanted to say more, but people were watching. She stormed off to set up at the front table. The meeting started at 7 p.m. sharp. Almost 200 residents had shown up, packing the community center beyond capacity. People stood along the walls and sat on the floor. I'd never seen such turnout for an HOA meeting. Brenda called the meeting to order, her voice tight. "We're here tonight to discuss a petition regarding commercial vehicle access. I want to remind everyone that this petition is being pushed by someone who isn't even a resident of our community. But he provides services we need," someone called out. "Order, please. Everyone will have a chance to speak." Brenda went through the formal procedures, reading the petition aloud, explaining the current restrictions. Then she opened the floor for comments. Mrs. Henderson stood up first. "I'm 82 years old. I can't drive to a refill station. I need my propane delivered. This rule is making my life very difficult." A man in his 50s raised his hand. "I work from home, and I need my backup generator for my internet connection. Propane powers that generator. When my tank runs low, I can't work. This rule is affecting my livelihood." One by one, residents stood up and shared their frustrations. Not just about propane, but about all the new restrictions Brenda had implemented. The paint color requirements, the parking rules, the fine system that seemed designed to extract money rather than improve the neighborhood. Brenda tried to maintain control, but the room was turning against her. Her 2 board members, sensing the shifting tide, stayed quiet. Then came the vote. The bylaws required a simple majority of attending homeowners to overturn a board decision. We had about 190 residents in the room out of 240 homes. Brenda called for a show of hands. All in favor of maintaining the current commercial vehicle restrictions. About 20 hands went up. I counted them carefully. 20 out of 190. All opposed. A forest of hands filled the room. Even Brenda's 2 board members raised their hands. The commercial vehicle ban was overturned. Brenda's face went pale. She tried to maintain her composure. Very well. The restriction is rescinded. This meeting is adjourned. But people weren't done. Another resident, a lawyer named David Chen, stood up. Actually, I'd like to call for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president. The room erupted in agreement. Brenda's eyes went wide. That's not on the agenda. According to our bylaws, any resident can call for a vote of no confidence during a general meeting if they have support from 20% of attending homeowners. David looked around the room. Show of hands if you support this motion. Nearly every hand went up. The vote happened quickly. It wasn't even close. Brenda Mitchell was removed as HOA president by a vote of 163 to 12. She gathered her papers in silence, her hands shaking. Without a word, she walked out of the community center. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Mrs. Henderson was nominated and elected as the new interim president. The board positions were opened up for volunteers, and several long-time residents stepped forward. The whole thing took less than an hour. After the meeting, people came up to thank me. Mrs. Henderson hugged me. "Thank you for fighting this," she said. "We needed someone to stand up to her." "I just wanted to do my job," I said. "You did more than that. You reminded us that we have power in our own community." I went home that night feeling satisfied but exhausted. The next morning, I resumed my delivery route in Sagebrush Estates. No one blocked my path. No one demanded permits. I filled tanks for Mrs. Henderson, the Johnsons, the Reeves family, and all my other customers. I saved Brenda's address for last. When I pulled up to 847 Desert View Drive, I half expected her to come storming out. But the house was quiet. I knocked on the door. No answer. I checked the backyard gate and found it unlocked. Her propane tank was indeed completely empty, the gauge reading 0. I filled it up, exactly as I would for any other customer. I left an invoice in her mailbox and drove away. 3 days later, I received a check from Brenda Mitchell for the full amount, along with a short note on expensive stationery. Please resume monthly service. Nothing else. No apology, no explanation. Just a request for service. I added her back to my route. Over the following weeks, life in Sagebrush Estates returned to normal. Mrs. Henderson proved to be an excellent HOA president. She rolled back most of Brenda's ridiculous rules, established clearer processes for proposing new regulations, and actually listened to residents' concerns. Brenda kept to herself. I saw her occasionally when I made deliveries, always working in her garden or reading on her porch. She never acknowledged me, and I never pushed for acknowledgement. We'd reached an unspoken understanding. The HOA held proper elections 3 months later. Mrs. Henderson ran unopposed and won. She appointed a diverse board that actually represented the neighborhood's interests. They established reasonable guidelines for commercial vehicles, requiring basic insurance and background checks, but nothing burdensome. My business thrived. Word spread about what had happened in Sagebrush Estates, and I got calls from other neighborhoods dealing with similar HOA issues. I became something of an accidental advocate for reasonable HOA governance, speaking at community meetings and helping residents understand their rights. But the real change happened in Sagebrush Estates itself. Residents became more engaged. They attended HOA meetings regularly. They volunteered for committees. They turned their neighborhood association into what it was supposed to be, a tool for improving community life, not a weapon for petty tyrants. I learned some valuable lessons through all of this. First, documentation matters. I kept careful records of every interaction with Brenda, every email, every denied permit application. When it came time to make my case to residents, I had evidence to back up my claims. Second, community matters. I couldn't have fought Brenda alone. It took dozens of residents standing up together to create change. Mrs. Henderson, David Chen, and so many others played crucial roles. Third, patience matters. I could have handled things differently. I could have gotten angry, made threats, or tried to escalate things legally. But instead, I worked within the system, followed the rules, and let Brenda's own actions speak for themselves. And fourth, consequences matter. Brenda learned the hard way that wielding power without wisdom leads to losing that power. Her empty propane tank was a minor inconvenience, but it symbolized something larger. Actions have consequences, even for HOA presidents. 6 months after the whole ordeal, I was making my usual Friday delivery to the neighborhood when I saw Brenda outside her house, supervising some landscaping work. On impulse, I pulled over. "Afternoon," I said, rolling down my window. She looked surprised. "Hello. Just wanted to check, are you satisfied with the propane service?" She considered the question. "Yes, it's fine. Good. Let me know if you need anything." I started to drive away, but she called out, "Wait." I stopped. She walked closer to my truck, looking uncomfortable. "What you did with the petition and everything. That wasn't about me, was it? Not really." I thought about it. No, it was about being able to do my job, about being treated fairly, about not letting someone with a little power abuse it. She nodded slowly. "I thought I was making the neighborhood better, raising standards. Were you? Or were you just making yourself feel important?" It was a harsh question, but she didn't flinch. "Maybe both, maybe more the second one." She paused. "I never apologized to you for blocking your deliveries, for making your work harder. I should have." "You're right, you should have." "Well, I'm apologizing now. I'm sorry." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or insincerity, but she just looked tired and a little sad. "Apology accepted," I said. She smiled slightly. "Thank you." As I drove away, I realized that was probably the best outcome I could have hoped for. No dramatic confrontation, no legal battles, no lasting hatred. Just a lesson learned, an apology given, and life moving forward. The Sagebrush Estates HOA continued to function smoothly under Mrs. Henderson's leadership. They organized neighborhood barbecues, maintained common areas, and mediated disputes fairly. It became a model for how HOAs should operate. I expanded my business, hiring 2 additional drivers and purchasing a second truck. The publicity from the Sagebrush situation brought in new customers, and I was able to serve a wider area around Phoenix. 1 year after the whole ordeal began, the HOA invited me to their annual community celebration as a guest of honor. I didn't particularly want to go, but Mrs. Henderson insisted, so I showed up. The party was held at the community center, the same place where the famous meeting had occurred. There was food, music, and a surprising number of people who wanted to shake my hand and hear the story firsthand. Mrs. Henderson gave a speech about community engagement and standing up for what's right. She mentioned me by name, which was embarrassing but also kind of nice. Toward the end of the evening, I noticed Brenda standing alone near the refreshment table. She wasn't socializing much, but she'd shown up, which took courage. I walked over. "How are you doing?" She looked startled. "Oh, I'm fine. This is a nice event." Mrs. Henderson did a good job organizing it. She's a good president, better than I was. She said it without bitterness, just stating a fact. "You could have been a good president too," I said, "if you'd listened more and dictated less." Probably. But I'd never been in charge of anything before. The HOA presidency was the first time anyone gave me real authority, and I handled it badly. I understood that. Some people spend their whole lives feeling powerless, and when they finally get a taste of power, they go overboard. "What are you doing now?" I asked. "I volunteer at the library. I help organize book clubs, coordinate events. It's nice. Nobody has to listen to me, but they do anyway because I make good suggestions." She smiled. "Turns out I'm better at facilitating than commanding." "That's good, really." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching neighbors mingle and laugh. "Your propane tank doing okay?" I asked. She laughed. "Yes, and I always keep an eye on the gauge now. Learned my lesson about letting things run empty. Good plan." As the party wound down, I helped clean up. I stacked chairs, threw away trash, and chatted with residents I'd come to know over the past year. It felt good to be part of the community, even though I didn't live there. Driving home that night, I reflected on everything that had happened. A simple delivery route blockage had turned into a neighborhood revolution. Brenda's petty power play had backfired spectacularly, costing her position and her reputation. But in the end, everyone learned something valuable. I learned that fighting back against unfairness doesn't always require aggression or revenge. Sometimes it just requires patience, organization, and letting people experience the natural consequences of their choices. Brenda's empty propane tank was a perfect metaphor. I didn't drain it. I just stopped filling it. The emptiness was a result of her own consumption and her own policies. The residents of Sagebrush Estates learned that they had power in their own community. They didn't have to accept tyrannical HOA boards or unreasonable rules. They could organize, vote, and create change. And Brenda learned that leadership isn't about control. It's about service. Real authority comes from earning respect, not demanding it. My business continued to grow. I eventually opened a second location in Tucson, expanding our service area across southern Arizona. The lessons I learned from the Sagebrush situation informed how I dealt with other HOAs and community associations. I became known for working collaboratively with neighborhoods rather than just treating them as territory to cover. I hired veterans when possible, giving preference to people who understood discipline and service. My team became known for reliability and professionalism. We wore clean uniforms, maintained our trucks meticulously, and treated every customer with respect. 2 years after the incident, I was invited to speak at a statewide HOA conference about the importance of fair policies toward service providers. I told the story of Sagebrush Estates, though I left out names to protect privacy. The audience of HOA board members listened intently. During the question and answer session, a woman raised her hand. "How did you keep from getting angry? I mean, this woman was clearly targeting you unfairly." "Didn't you want to just tell her off?" "Of course I did," I admitted. "But anger wasn't going to solve the problem. She wanted me to get angry. That would have justified her actions in her mind. So instead, I stayed calm, documented everything, and worked within the system." Another man asked, "What about letting her propane run out? Wasn't that revenge?" "No," I said firmly. "It was a natural consequence. She'd made it impossible for me to provide service, so I discontinued her account. I didn't sabotage anything or do anything illegal. I just stopped providing a service I could no longer deliver." The distinction mattered. I never wanted to be seen as petty or vindictive. What I did was strategic and justified. After the conference, several HOA presidents approached me privately. They thanked me for standing up to unreasonable regulations. A few admitted they'd been guilty of similar overreach and pledged to do better. Change, I realized, happens in small increments. One conversation, one policy revision, one neighborhood at a time. Back in Sagebrush Estates, life continued peacefully. Mrs. Henderson served 2 full terms as president before retiring and handing leadership to David Chen, the lawyer who'd called for the vote of no confidence. Under his leadership, the HOA published a comprehensive guide to residents' rights and established an appeals process for fines and violations. Brenda remained active in the community, but never sought leadership positions again. She found her niche in organizing social events and cultural activities. Her book club became quite popular, and she started a neighborhood garden club that beautified common areas throughout Sagebrush Estates. I saw her occasionally during deliveries. We'd exchange pleasantries, sometimes chat about the weather or upcoming community events. It was cordial if not warm. The animosity had faded, replaced by mutual understanding. 3 years after the incident, I got married. My wife, Jennifer, was a teacher I'd met through mutual friends. She thought the whole HOA story was hilarious and loved telling it at parties. I always cringed a little when she got to the part about the empty propane tank, but people invariably laughed and took my side. We bought a house in a neighborhood with a reasonable HOA. I paid attention to their bylaws, attended meetings, and made sure I understood the rules. Knowledge, I'd learned, was power. My business employed 15 people at that point. We serviced over 2,000 customers across Arizona. I diversified into natural gas systems and backup generators, building on the core propane business. We were profitable and growing, but I never forgot where I'd been. When new drivers complained about difficult customers or unreasonable HOA restrictions, I'd tell them the story of Brenda Mitchell and Sagebrush Estates. The moral was always the same: stay calm, document everything, and work within the system. Most conflicts could be resolved without drama. But when someone abused their power, it was important to stand firm. Not with anger or revenge, but with patience and strategic action. 4 years after the incident, Mrs. Henderson passed away. She was 86 and had lived a full life. The funeral was held at a church near Sagebrush Estates, and the turnout was enormous. Hundreds of people came to pay respects to a woman who'd led her community with wisdom and grace. I attended with Jennifer. We sat near the back, listening to eulogies from family members, friends, and former neighbors. Multiple people mentioned her service as HOA president and how she'd restored sanity to Sagebrush Estates. During the reception, I spoke with David Chen. "She was special," I said. "She really was. You know, she always gave you credit for mobilizing the neighborhood. She said you taught everyone that they didn't have to accept bad leadership." "I just wanted to deliver propane." He laughed. "You did more than that. You changed how people thought about their own power." I saw Brenda at the reception too. She'd organized the food service, coordinating donations from various families. She moved through the crowd efficiently, making sure everyone was taken care of. It was clear she'd found her calling in service rather than authority. As Jennifer and I left, Brenda caught up with us. "Thank you for coming." "Mrs. Henderson meant a lot to this community," I said. "She did. And she always spoke highly of you." Brenda paused. "I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. I'm sorry for what I put you through." "I was wrong, I know, and I've forgiven you, really." She looked relieved. "Thank you." She turned to Jennifer. "Your husband is a good man, stubborn but good." Jennifer laughed. "I know, that's why I married him." Life moved on. Seasons changed, years passed. The incident that had once dominated my thoughts became just another story, a memory that occasionally surfaced but no longer carried emotional weight. My business continued to thrive. I opened a third location in Flagstaff, covering northern Arizona. We employed 30 people and had become one of the largest independent propane distributors in the state. I'd built something I was proud of, a company that treated customers and employees with respect. Jennifer and I had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. We raised them in a stable, loving home. I taught them the lessons I'd learned. Stand up for yourself, but do it wisely. Work within systems when possible, but don't be afraid to challenge unjust rules. Treat everyone with respect, even people who don't respect you. 5 years after the incident, Sagebrush Estates celebrated its 20th anniversary as a neighborhood. They threw a big party with food trucks, live music, and carnival games for kids. I was invited again, this time just as a long-time service provider rather than any kind of hero. I brought my family. My kids ran around with other children, their laughter filling the air. Jennifer chatted with neighbors, making friends easily as she always did. I found myself standing near the community center, looking at a plaque that had been installed. It honored residents who'd contributed significantly to the neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson's name was at the top. Below were others, including David Chen and several long-time volunteers. Near the bottom, I was surprised to see Aaron Nichols, Desert Sun Propane, for demonstrating that service and integrity matter. I hadn't known about the plaque. Nobody had told me. It was humbling and deeply meaningful. David Chen appeared beside me. He was still HOA president, now in his 6th year. Surprise! You didn't have to do this. We wanted to. You're part of this community, even though you don't live here. You deliver more than propane. You deliver reliability, consistency, and respect. I didn't know what to say. Thank you for everything. The party continued around us. I watched families enjoying themselves, kids playing, neighbors laughing together. This was what a community should be: supportive, engaged, alive. Later, I saw Brenda playing with some children, organizing a game of tag. She looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I'd never seen during her brief reign as HOA president. She'd found peace in serving rather than controlling. As the sun set over Sagebrush Estates, I gathered my family to head home. My son asked, "Dad, why do people keep thanking you?" "Because I helped them solve a problem once." "What kind of problem?" Jennifer jumped in. "Your dad stood up to a bully. He did it smart and brave." "Will you tell me the story?" I looked at him, this little boy who was just starting to understand the complexities of the world. "Sure, buddy. When you're a little older." We drove home through the warm Arizona evening. The mountains glowed orange and purple in the fading light. I felt content, fulfilled in a way that had nothing to do with business success or recognition. I'd fought a small battle and won, not through aggression or revenge, but through patience and community. I'd let Brenda's propane tank run empty not out of spite, but as a natural consequence of policies she'd created. And in that emptiness, she'd learned something valuable. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply allowing people to experience the results of their own choices. The years continued to pass. My children grew. My business evolved. Sagebrush Estates remained a regular stop on my delivery routes, a neighborhood that had taught me as much as I'd taught them. Brenda eventually moved away, relocating to Scottsdale to be closer to her daughter. Before she left, she stopped by my office. It was unexpected. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said, "and to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For not destroying me when you could have. For giving me a chance to learn and grow. For treating me with dignity even when I didn't deserve it." I thought about those early days when I'd been so frustrated and angry. We all deserve dignity, Brenda, even when we make mistakes. I made more than mistakes. I abused my authority. I hurt people, but you showed me a better way. What way is that? That leadership is service. That power is responsibility. That respecting others is more important than being respected. She smiled. I'm a better person now because of what happened. I didn't think so at the time, but I am. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about second chances and redemption. Brenda had been a difficult person, had made my life harder, had acted out of insecurity and ego. But she'd learned and changed. That mattered. The propane business might seem mundane to some people. Filling tanks, scheduling deliveries, maintaining equipment. But I'd learned it was about more than logistics. It was about relationships, trust, and being there when people needed you. Every time I drove into Sagebrush Estates, I remembered that chaotic period when everything seemed to be falling apart. Brenda blocking my route, customers going without service, the petition drive, the dramatic HOA meeting. It had been stressful and uncertain, but it had also been clarifying. I discovered what I was made of, what I stood for, what I was willing to fight for. And I'd learned that fighting didn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it meant strategy, patience, and allowing natural consequences to unfold. The empty propane tank had been the perfect metaphor. I hadn't emptied it. Brenda's own usage and her own policies had emptied it. I'd simply stopped filling it. The lesson was clear. If you block the people who help you, eventually you'll find yourself without help. 10 years after the incident, I sold my business. It was a good sale to a company that promised to maintain our standards and keep my employees. I was ready for a new chapter, ready to spend more time with my family and pursue other interests. On my last day, I made one final delivery to Sagebrush Estates. Mrs. Henderson's house, now owned by a young family, was still on my route. I filled their tank, left an invoice, and stood in the driveway for a moment. The neighborhood looked peaceful. Well-maintained homes, clean streets, kids riding bikes. A functional HOA kept things organized without being oppressive. It was exactly what a community should be. I drove out through the main gate, past the spot where Brenda had first blocked my path a decade earlier. So much had changed since that morning. I'd built a successful business, grown as a person, and learned invaluable lessons about power, community, and human nature. The story of the HOA Karen who blocked my delivery route, and how I let her propane tank run empty had become almost legendary in Arizona HOA circles. People still talked about it, still used it as an example of smart, nonviolent resistance to tyrannical leadership. But for me, it was just a chapter in a larger story. A chapter about doing the right thing, standing up to bullies, and believing that communities work best when everyone contributes and no one dominates. As I drove away from Sagebrush Estates for the last time as a delivery driver, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Not because I'd won some battle, but because I'd been part of something larger than myself. I'd helped a community find its voice and its power. And somewhere in Scottsdale, Brenda was probably living her life, hopefully still learning and growing. Her empty propane tank was long forgotten, but the lesson remained. Treat people fairly, lead with humility, and never underestimate the power of consequences. The Arizona sun beat down on my truck as I headed back to the office. Another route completed, another day's work done. In the grand scheme of things, I was just a propane delivery guy. But I'd learned that ordinary people doing ordinary work could still make extraordinary differences. And that was enough.